Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this May 3rd, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Tonight we open up with our first story from Afghanistan, where researchers search for survivors.
A surviving cockerel calls across a desolate landscape. Other farm animals lie dead. The houses on the right survived. Those on the left have gone after the side of the mountain collapsed. And the people who lived here are buried deep down underneath tens of meters of mud. Rescuers have given up digging, knowing that none is left alive. A new landscape has emerged here as farmland collapsed onto the homes of the farmers who'd planted the fields. The ground underneath my feet has a curiously springy feel. The mud is unstable, unsettled, and beneath it lie the bodies of thousands of people, which will probably never be found. The event happened in two phases. When houses were first buried, hundreds ran to help, and then more mud came down. Isratullah was one of them and just managed to scramble for safety. Many others did not.
Around 600 people, when they went to rescue those families and who were trapped under the mud and the debris, everything. So unfortunately, then there was another landslide.
Is there any
which
hope?
Was severe, more severe than the first one.
Is there any hope for the people under the mud?
Unfortunately, no.
Most of the survivors, and there are not many, now have tents provided by aid agencies, but some are still exposed on the open hillside. Blankets have arrived and basic food aid from international and local agencies. And as the second night fell, the only sound that could be heard was of women quietly weeping for the dead. David Loyne, BBC News, in Badakhshan, northeast Afghanistan.
Friends, that report with David Loyne was from yesterday, from Saturday. We have an updated report from him from today, in which you'll hear how these survivors of this landslide, they claim the lives of up to 2,500 people. These people, the survivors, are spending a second night in freezing conditions on an open hillside. You'll see in this next video how some tents and blankets have been provided by agencies following the disaster in the remote northeast province of Badakhshan. But many people are struggling to cope with. Friends, this story relates now to the third seal. Let's put that seal up on the screen for just a moment. Bring it forward. You can see, counting over to the third column, you see number 3 at the top, and then a black background, and that is representing how Revelation depicts the third seal as a black horse, which Jesus Christ described in plain language as having the characteristic of famine and scarcity of food, people starving. And that's what's happening over here in Afghanistan following this landslide, with fights breaking out now over loaves of bread. David Loyne again reporting.
For these children and women, this is the second night that they'll be out on this cold hillside, and up here in the mountains in northeast Badakhshan it does get very, very cold at night. There is some shelter, some tents have begun to arrive, and you can see some men on the bank over there who are just moving tent poles across, trying to find a new patch, a flatter piece of ground for tents in safety away from the village. There was, just a short while ago, a pretty tragic sort of scene here when you can see the men on the bank up over there, who had quite an argument between each other about who was going to get a piece of bread. The police arrived with a sack of bread, some local aid, and these men who'd not eaten for probably all of today. There was quite an argument between them about who should get that bread. But these are the low numbers of tens, hundreds of people who've survived. Thousands of their neighbours and relatives are underneath the mud on the other side of the hill.
David Loyne with that report again. Tonight, friends, a number of the news reports relate to the first seal. You can see on the chart, we'll bring it forward, the first seal is depicted in Revelation 6 as a white horse, which Jesus Christ described as having characteristics of deception, anti-false Christ, false prophets. He said, beware, don't let anybody deceive you. In our next story, this one relates to bishops to be held accountable if they fail to report sexual abuse in the Roman Catholic Church.
He's the superstar Pope, widely lauded for his desire to tackle big global issues such as poverty, inequality and war. But he has not been immune from criticism, accused of ignoring the issue of sex abuse within the Catholic Church itself. That could be about to change. A Vatican Sexual Abuse Advisory Board he set up, meeting for the first time, says current church laws are not sufficient to hold bishops accountable if they fail to protect children from paedophile priests. It wants clear and effective measures to deal with the problem.
One of the areas that we will deal with is this whole area of accountability and try and develop protocols or suggestions that could lead to an open process, but that would hold people accountable for their responsibility to protect children.
Victims groups say that is certainly not the case now. They point to Pope John Paul II's decision to make Cardinal Bernard Law an archpriest of a Vatican basilica in Rome after Law resigned in disgrace as Archbishop of Boston following a sex abuse scandal. Members of the Pope's advisory board admit change could still be some way off.
I know there's many survivors around the world who are hoping and have great expectations of this commission. And what I could say so far is you can't make concrete promises, but as a survivor myself, I am hopeful that we are going to achieve what is hoped for. But it's very early days yet.
In the meantime, the Vatican remains under fire, with critics saying that instead of setting the world to rights, Pope Francis should perhaps be putting his own house in order first. Tom Spender, BBC News.
Friends, more stories tonight related to religion. In the world's religious system of Christianity, the world's Christians in the southeastern city of Wenzhou of China are warning of a crackdown on their faith following the destruction of one church building there and warnings of possible destruction to other buildings used for church services in China. Despite official atheism, there are more regular churchgoers in China than in the whole of Europe. Wenzhou in China is often called the Jerusalem of China, with over 1,000 church buildings, but events of the past week have caused consternation among the Christian congregations there. Carrie Gracie reports.
This congregation is used to practicing the Christian virtues of hope and courage. But the events of the past week have pushed them to their limit. A dozen are in detention, the rest afraid to speak. Worst of all, the new church, which took them 12 years to build, has been destroyed. Sanjiang Church, only a week ago. Capacity 3,000 believers, fit for a growing congregation. And this is all that's left. The government said the church broke planning rules. For several weeks, the congregation mounted a vigil to protect it. Tang Xiaofang said police sealed off the area last week and bulldozers moved in.
I felt very miserable. I had spent days and nights with the others trying to protect the church, and when I saw it had been torn down, I was really sad. I wept.
So we're just going to try and get through to the church. There's a police checkpoint up here. Oh, so they're saying it's dangerous up ahead, which is why we can't go up there. They're not going to let anyone through. They're clearly extremely concerned about letting the congregation up to the church and having an outpouring of anger and distress that they can't control. Another congregation, another government threat. Take your cross off the roof or your church will be destroyed. After much soul-searching, they've given in. The Chinese constitution does promise freedom of religion, and the Wenzhou government acknowledges that Christians are often pillars of the community. But Beijing is wary of a faith which has greater appeal here than its own ideology. This city of churches is being brought to heel. Carrie Gracie, BBC News, Wenzhou.
And friends, there's another story in today's news related to the world's Christian churches, and one that's kind of like a double church. I mean, both a Christian church building and called a cathedral, and the other at the same place it was at one time used as an Islam mosque. And because of what's about to happen, this is causing hundreds of thousands of people to have signed a petition to prevent Cordoba's famous cathedral from becoming the property of the Catholic Church. The building was originally a mosque before housing a cathedral in the 15th century. Tom Burridge has this report.
Welcome inside an architectural jewel, a forest of pillars where Islamic and Christian building work and symbols sit side by side.
This is the oldest part of the building, built as a mosque in the 8th century by the Muslim Moorish rulers who controlled this part of Spain. Now called Andalusia, it was then Al-Andalus. But what makes this building unique is that bang in the centre here is a cathedral, built later in the 15th and 16th centuries by Spain's Catholic kings.
Today, Catholics attend Mass here almost every day. No one currently owns the building, but the church manages it, and under law, in 2 years, it's set to become the owner. Now, 330,000 people, in an online petition, have called on that decision to be blocked. And this is why.
They are trying to change the name, and they name the temple like cathedral, only cathedral, and they are erasing the name of mosque of everywhere. And for us, it is a manipulation of history and memory of the building.
The Spanish Catholic Church recognises that this was a mosque, but says for centuries it has been a cathedral.
The church, however, says the accusation that it is trying to distort the history and character of this building is unjust. It would be impossible to wipe out the Islamic history of this building, says the Reverend Pablo Garzón. We don't want to. It symbolises the story of Cordoba and Spain. The biggest congregation of this building are the tourists. And away from the controversy, the fact that most people regard this as a mosque and a cathedral is a unique selling point. It draws 1.4 million visitors every year. Tom Burridge, BBC News in Cordoba.
And friends, before we go to a story on the Ukraine, we've got a story. You know, tonight we've had stories that relate to the white seal, the first seal, the white horse of Revelation, the horse of religious deception, false prophets, false priests. We've had a story that related to the third seal, famine, with the people fighting over bread after a landslide. And of course the landslide relates to the fourth seal in the sense that Jesus Christ described that fourth seal as having three characteristics. Loimos, the primary characteristic, disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt, and seismos, seismic activity, commotions in the air, commotions on the ground. And landslide, that's a commotion on the ground, buried a lot of people in mud. Taraki was another term Christ used, meaning trouble, not the major trouble, not the mega trouble of the fifth seal of great tribulation, great trouble, but nonetheless trouble related to the fourth seal. We've had those elements in the news tonight. Our next few stories will be related to the second seal of Revelation, which is depicted there as a red horse that Jesus Christ described in plain language as having characteristics, attributes of war and rumors of war. Nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom, world war. We're now in between rounds 2 and 3 of world war. But in the meantime, there is internal strife that goes on, related to war, related to that second seal, the red horse. And in South Sudan, we're going to go to that story before we go to the Ukraine. South Sudan troops seize a little town called Bentiu, B-E-N-T-I-U. Government forces appear to have taken control of the rebel-held town there after opening fire on the enemy positions. The BBC's Alistair Lighthead was at the UN base on the edge of the town and saw troops and militia march toward this oil-rich town, which was captured by rebels last month. On Friday, the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said peace talks aimed at ending the violence between the two largest ethnic groups have been agreed.
Well, I'm here at the UN base on the outskirts of Bentiu town, and we were here when the government forces and militia aligned with them came right outside the base, opening fire into the bush in an attempt to try and take back the town of Bentiu from rebel troops. They came, they stopped, there was danger here on the camp, all the staff went inside bunkers, there was danger for the 25,000 people under UN protection who are sheltering in the camps here as well. And there was a concern that there would be some incoming fire from the rebel troops. That didn't happen. The government forces marched straight down the road, opening fire with rockets, with heavy machine guns, and moved now into Bentiu itself. It's only 3 kilometers from here, and we can no longer hear the sound of gunfire, which suggests from where we're standing that they have taken back the town of Bentiu. This was a town that they lost just 2 weeks ago. When they left, there were some atrocities carried out. Hundreds of people were killed by those troops coming in. That's what the UN forces have told us. And the fear is that there might be revenge attacks by the government troops when they go into the city. We can't get in there as yet. We can't verify what's going on, but it certainly seems that the government forces have retaken Bentiu. We've heard on the radios of 2 other, or possibly 3 other areas of the country where there have been government offensives against areas held by rebel forces. Now this town has changed hands a number of times, but why it's significant today is that just 2 days ago, the US Secretary of State, John Kerry, came here and held face-to-face meetings with President Salva Kiir, who promised to try and work towards peace and to move to Ethiopia to engage in peace talks in the coming days. The Secretary of State said that what happens in the next few days is very important to the way the international community treats the way that South Sudan is being dealt with by the government and by the rebel forces. What we have seen is a clear en masse force of hundreds of troops on foot marching in to retake a town held by rebels. This isn't, I expect, what John Kerry wanted after he'd had talks with Salva Kiir. But that's what's happened. Everyone here is safe, and it appears the town is quiet.
Now, friends, we'll go to news related to the Ukraine and the second seal, the red horse of war, which includes war within a country, civil-type war. On Friday, May 2nd, Friday, dozens of people were killed in a fire in an official building in the city of Odessa in southwest Ukraine, according to local police. The deaths came as pro-Russian protesters clashed with Ukrainian government supporters in the city. Footage in this video will show people trying to escape from the burning building as flames spread. David Stern reports.
We had a demonstration and clashes between pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian protesters. That resulted in some deaths, but after that there was a fire in the trade union's building in Odessa where the pro-Russian protesters have a base of operations, and apparently at least 30 or in the 30s numbers of people who died. Some figures are 31. Other people are saying 38 people at least died, many of them from smoke inhalation and from jumping from the upper stories of the building. It's not clear exactly what started the blaze, and it's not clear who exactly was caught in the fire, but as I say, there were a number of pro-Russian protesters who were probably there. And this obviously adds to the tension and the explosive nature of these protests, of the situation in Ukraine as a whole, not just in the eastern part of the country, but now in the south where Odessa is located.
And the risk, of course, is that the more Kiev tries to regain control of several places at once, the greater the risk of further escalation, I suppose.
Well, exactly, and that's what we've been seeing so far. And these are almost like bushfires that keep on sprouting up in all sorts of places. We've seen it in Donetsk, the Donetsk region, a number of cities there, then the Lugansk region, and now the fear is that it's going to spread to places like Odessa, to Kharkiv, which is another city in the east. And this is exactly what the government has said. In fact, the acting president, Alexander Turchinov, warned of this week. He said that the aim now is to keep this insurgency, as he calls it, terrorism, from spreading from the two eastern regions to the rest of the country.
And friends, those protests, that burning of the building, did spark the Ukraine protest. The pro-Russian activists have attacked the police headquarters in Ukraine. Now, this is an update. That story you just saw was from Friday, May 2nd. This is an update from today, just hours ago. Pro-Russian activists have attacked the police headquarters in Ukraine's southern city of Odessa, forcing the release of several people held over deadly violence 2 days ago. Friday's clashes led to more than, the update on this tells us it's now more than 40 deaths. Most victims were pro-Russian separatists killed when the building they were in caught fire. Other cities in the east of Ukraine have also escalated their calls for allegiance for Russia, as Fergal Keen reports.
Vienna, renowned as a city of espionage during the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the West in the last century.
And now, as Moscow and the West confront each other once again over Ukraine,
There are signs that this city is becoming a battleground in a new Cold War. Dmytro Firtash, one of Ukraine's most powerful and wealthy oligarchs, showed me the spot where he was arrested during a business trip to Vienna in March. The Austrian police acting on behalf of the FBI in the United States. He posted a record-breaking bail of more than $170 million to get out of the police cell where he was held for more than a week. But he must stay here in Austria until a court decides if he should be extradited to the United States to face charges of alleged bribery and corruption.
I am absolutely innocent. I did not pay any bribes and did not set up any organized criminal group. I don't understand why all this has happened to me. But what is important is there is a geopolitical struggle between the United States and Russia underway. The United States needs an enemy abroad to solve problems at home, and Ukraine happened to become a battlefield.
A well-placed source in the United States told the BBC Mr. Firtash may indeed be a pawn in a bigger game. The Americans wanting to get hold of him partly because of his strong business links with the elite in Russia, about whom he may have much sensitive information. How concerned are you that you will eventually be extradited to the United States?
No one knows, only God knows what will happen. I never thought I'd end up in prison. But we have a strong team of lawyers, and the United States prosecutors will have to work very hard to prove their case, because the whole case is fictional.
So now Mr. Firtash waits to hear what his fate will be. His colleagues fear the Americans will lean on the Austrian authorities to ensure he is extradited to the United States, where he could come under pressure, Cold War style, to reveal all. Richard Galpin, BBC News, Vienna.
And friends, the story that I was leading into, I'll have to play that for you tomorrow night. This story, where on the bribery and corruption charges against Mr. Firtash, Mr. Firtash gave an exclusive television interview to the BBC correspondent Richard Galpin in this video, and this video leads into our last story for tonight, related to a White House correspondent dinner. President Obama has, and then I've got a scripture I want to show you that gives a big warning related to all of tonight's news. Very big warning from Ezekiel 5, one that Mr. Armstrong taught us well on. President Obama has used the White House Correspondents' Dinner to poke fun at himself, his opponents, and the continuing deadlock between the main political parties. The BBC's Beth McLeod reports from Washington.
The halls of the Washington Hilton, filled with those more used to stalking the halls of power. DC is usually a buttoned-up, business-suited sort of town, but this is a night for glad-handing and glamour.
Well, this is Washington's answer to the Oscars, when journalists who normally spend their days dissecting the president's policies let their hair down and mingle with the man himself. That's why some who come affectionately call it the nerd prom.
It's grown from a small gathering of White House reporters to a less intimate affair, attended by Hollywood stars, sports players, media moguls and business tycoons. But the point of the party is really to have a bit of fun at the president's expense.
Mr. President, your harshest critics have compared you to Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, and even Satan. And I just have to say, those comparisons are outrageous. You look way older than those guys.
Okay, at this White House dinner, they're poking a little fun, and the president makes a little bit of fun of himself. But friends, as the nation parties. You know, Ezekiel warns in Ezekiel 5. Let me pull this forward, and let's see if this is going to be large enough. I may have to, we'll do this scripture again tomorrow night, and I'll print out the verses separately so you can see them a little bit better than this. But Ezekiel 5 tells us that a third part, if I'm going to skip ahead to verse 12 because we're at the end of our time here, but I want to go over, we'll take a minute overtime and cover verse 12 of Ezekiel 5. You'll see in the first part of Ezekiel 1 and 2, in the second chapter, in the second verse of Ezekiel 5, God is saying, "You shall burn with fire a third part in the midst of the city when the days of the siege are fulfilled, and you shall take a third part." He begins verse 1 with talking about taking a sharp knife and a barber's razor and causing it to pass upon your head and upon your beard, and then take the balanced away and divide the hair. Verse 2, "You shall burn with fire a third part in the midst of the city when the days of the siege are fulfilled, and you shall take a third part and smite about it with a knife, and a third part you shall scatter in the wind, and I'll draw out a sword after them." Now verse 12 actually expounds on that and explains verse 2, which is a little cloudy by itself, but verse 12 clarifies it somewhat. "A third part of you shall die with the pestilence and with famine." There we've got let's go close on the chart. We've got our third seal and our fourth seal. We've got the black horse of famine, the fourth horse, the fourth seal, the pale horse of disease epidemics, and here or pestilence. And so here we've got in this verse, it starts out telling us that a third part of the people will die from these two seals, the third seal and the fourth seal. They're reversed here, the fourth seal and the third seal, the pestilence and with famine. "Shall they be consumed in the midst of you?" And the third seal and the fourth seal take care of 1/3 of the population of the world, and a third part of you shall fall by the sword. The second seal, the red horse, war and rumor, war, the horse of war, consumes another third. That's 2/3 of the people. And then the last part of the verse says, "And I will scatter a third part into all the winds, and I'll draw a sword out after them." The final third are taken captive. They're taken captive by armies, pursuing them, rounding them up, killing some of them. And eventually, only a small percentage are left as Jesus Christ returns. And there's a happy ending. And the people that get killed, we will see them again in a resurrection. And in the interim, a small people will be left over who will, when Jesus Christ returns to usher in and restore his kingdom upon this earth, there will be some human beings left alive, a small number of them, a small percentage of them, left alive to continue mankind during 1,000 years of peace that our predecessor are here referred to as the world tomorrow, a utopian time of wonderful peace on this earth, where Satan will then have been put away by the King of Kings, Jesus Christ. It's going to be a happy, wonderful time. So even though we've had a lot of bad news in the first part of the program tonight, we're ending on a happy note that Jesus Christ is going to usher in 1,000 years of a utopian, wonderful world tomorrow. That's all the time we have for tonight, this Sunday evening report. In fact, I'm over time a little bit, friends, and I'll blow this scripture up larger on the screen for us tomorrow night. Till, God willing, the Creek Don't Rise will be back Monday evening with the current day's news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until then, until next time, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying, so long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.